Ladies and gentlemen, let's start, shall we? Welcome. My name is Paul Sims. I'm speaking to you from home in London, UK. I am super excited about today's webinar. What I would love for you to do immediately is to open up that chat window and say hello. Say hello. Give us your name, give us where you're calling in from. Give us even a couple of words about why you're here today and what you're most interested in hearing about. That's really, really useful for us as we move forward. Today's session is called Content Reengineered for 2025. And I suppose the reason we use these kind of engineering style graphics and the words around it is because we want to illustrate that getting content right in pharma is not just about the artist's flick of a brush. It's not just about the copywriter's dulcet tones as they put together a beautifully crafted message. It's also about the hard engineering, the plumbing, the slightly unsexy but very necessary ecosystem work that goes in behind the scenes to make sure that that content gets through MLR, gets through to the customer, gets translated, gets into all of the different places that it should be, as well as, of course, giving us a strong feedback loop. It's a popular webinar. We've got more than 600 of you signed up, and we're going to have a really good conversation today. I'm encouraging you to use the chat window because I want that chat window to be active. I want us to have a conversation, a two-way, three-way, 10-way, 100-way conversation, not just a one-way. So please do answer the questions yourselves. Do take part in everything. And what I'm actually going to do right away, I don't normally do this, is I'm going to actually launch my first poll question immediately. The reason is because it's a three-parter. So there are actually three questions in one, and it might take you a couple of minutes to get through those. So I can see lots of people introducing themselves in the chat window, but also a lot of people who have not. So please, everyone, make sure you introduce yourself in the chat window and get used to making this an interactive session. You can see the poll question on your screen now. Where are you today? And three different questions, which I'd love you to answer while I am introducing our fair panelists who you can see on your screen right now. Now, all of our panelists are, of course, speaking in a personal capacity, not necessarily representing the views of their organization. Let's go through them one by one. So, Katerina, it's her first webinar with me. Welcome, Katerina, and thank you so much for being part of this. She is the Executive Director for Medical Launch across Europe and has a focus on oncology and hematology. Katerina, you didn't need to turn your camera on yet, but it's very nice that you're here and showing us all that you are indeed here. Maybe now maybe everyone can just turn their cameras on as I introduce them now. That's going to be the way. Anyway, Katerina is obviously at Novartis. She's got 15 years in pharma, and she's led a lot of launch strategies across different therapy areas, immunology, cardiology, oncology, hematology. And she's also a board member at a Swiss biotech as well. Katerina, we're very, very happy you could be here. Thank you. Jane, you can turn your camera on too now. I love this, actually. I'm going to do this in the future. Jane is calling in from Boston and is one of our friends at Impatient Health. You've probably seen her on a webinar before. Because she's wonderful, we very much like Jane. She describes herself as a geek, unashamed geek, but she is also a geek that can communicate. We like that very much. And yeah, she's been at Otsuka for coming up to 2 years now. And what I love is her ability to transcend both the data and technology side of what we do and the human side of what we do. Massively appreciate, Jane, you and your expertise being here today. Tor, if you can turn your camera on. Tor is the Chief Innovation Officer at Anthill. Again, someone who you've probably met on a previous webinar because he is a wise man and he is able, like Jane, to not only cross the technology side, but also the humanistic side, and is famed for being able to explain difficult concepts very clearly. Really appreciate you, Tor, lending your expertise to this conversation. 20 years in SaaS, pioneering technology leader, and definitely my go-to person when I want someone to speak with authority and nuance on the subjects of AI. So thank you, Tor, for being here. I can see 60% of you have done the poll, so keep those answers rolling in. And Hugh, certainly last but not least. Hugh, do turn your camera on. Again, you've seen Hugh on a previous webinar. He's the Director of Content Strategy, very much in that plumbing that we talked about before, but also I think doing some very inspirational work. Content strategy leader, 20 plus years in marketing technology, content production, digital transformation, and he's driving the omnichannel strategy at Astellas, leadership roles at Viva and beyond in the past as well. So super, super valuable that you're here as well. Hugh, thank you guys. So today's session is being recorded. You don't need to ask me. I'm going to send out the recording after this. And what we're going to do next is actually have a look at the polls that we actually answered already. You might remember that when you registered for today's event, you answered a question. And here are the answers to those questions. Two questions, actually. The first one, what are the biggest challenges you're facing with AI content in 2025? And as you can see, it's quite an even distribution, only 9% on breaking down silos, but pretty even on all the other ones. And achieving true personalization is the challenge. It's also kind of the holy grail, as I often call it. It's something that we as an industry have been trying to achieve even since pre-pandemic days. But now, of course, with AI, we might feel it's a little closer to reality. So that's interesting. And then another question. Which area of your organization would benefit most from improved content engineering in 2025? Here, a bit of more of a clear winner, 35% on enhancing the omnichannel delivery and customer engagement. 28% not too far behind on modular content. So obviously a strong play there for modular, and then lower numbers for the others. So very practical, I would argue, the answer to that question. So thank you very much. Okay, well, I'm going to get rid of my slides. I'm going to get the conversation going. Before I do that, I am going to close this poll. So you've got 5 seconds to finish answering this poll if you haven't done already. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you very much. A little flurry of final responses I got there. Let's have a look at the results. Zoom has kind of slowed down since the olden days, so apologies. It takes me a couple of seconds to get the results on the screen. Just talk amongst yourselves. I don't know if you can see it or not. I can. So I'll read out the results. We have, first question, how well structured is your organization's approach? 22% of people say scaling, only 11% say optimized, although I have to say that's probably a higher number than I was expecting to see on the optimized answer there. Perhaps no surprise that process-driven and ad hoc also quite high, so that's cool. What's your biggest general frustration with pharma's current content operations? So siloed processes coming to the fore in this one, nearly a third of people voting for that, and pretty even numbers, high teens for all the rest. So basically we have a lot of issues. And how is AI currently being used in the content ecosystem? 1% of people saying fully integrated, probably no surprise there. Isolated pilots taking over nearly 2/5 of the vote. And so another range, you can obviously read that. So thank you very much for everyone who answered those questions. Guys, let's start talking. Let's start talking about where you are today on this spectrum, shall we say, of having your plumbing and your ecosystem engineered as you might wish it to. Why don't you, panel, give us an idea of where you are today and what your frustrations or challenges are in being further along than you would like to be? Who'd like to go first? Right, I'm going to pick on.
I'll jump.
She unmuted herself.
If anyone is waiting for someone to jump in, I would say we're still in that kind of middle category of the isolated pilot space, but we're trying a few different things. We've got a enterprise-wide platform for kind of a large language model-based generative AI solution for our entire company, kind of in a more, I would say, like you would use ChatGPT. This is actually built on Claude, but either way. And then we've got some really nice use cases that are flourishing in certain specific areas that are tailored to problems to solve. So we kind of have both a tide that's lifting all boats, and then also some very, specific and tailored solutions. We're doing work in the promotional review process to see if we can automate some of the intake of promotional review content. And then we're also looking at using AI in our situation analysis, kind of our brand planning process to summarize all of the market research and various large scale 300 slide decks and things like that. And then we also have some use cases with our training department. I have a kind of a broad functional area. So we have some training AI chatbot type use cases for giving our reps an opportunity to practice with a physician chatbot. So those are some of just examples of things that we're doing across the board, but certainly not all integrated and nothing is actually scaled across the enterprise just yet.
Mm. That's comforting to hear, Jane. Similar kind of position, not
Yeah.
quite scaled, very much in experimentation mode in some instances. But we at Lestellus, we started with thinking about, really putting the customer experience out right at the beginning of our journey. So we started to think about how we would, if we don't want to say the same thing to the same person all the time, we have to think about how our content aligns to that strategy. So we started with something that we call our omni-channel engagement framework, which helps us to align what we say at the right time to the right customer. I know it sounds trite, and I sounded sort of, I'm not sure if the tone there was reflective of what I wanted to actually say. But what we also try to do is start to align our content to those actual pieces. So we're not thinking about final form tactics, but we're thinking in a more modular channel agnostic way, aligning content to customer experience. Once we have that framework, it really allows us to start thinking about how we create content in a more intuitive way, aligned to how we want to deliver the right message. So I'm really proud of some of the foundational work that we put in place there. We've also done a lot of work in establishing our modular content library aligned to that experience. So if I'm thinking about, what should I show this physician in this segment at this point in time, then I have something to show. So kind of building all these foundational blocks is great. And I think the challenge that we've had is operationalizing these things. And I'm excited about the opportunities of AI. We began to experiment in AI platforms that can start to understand and consume this information. So it's not a operational heavy lift for marketers. And I think as we start to, one of the other things that we've been doing is kind of scaling our omni-channel journeys within our affiliates. So how do they create experiences and stop creating kind of singular tactics? But then that's an enormous amount of change. So we're also starting to think about, how we kind of take some of these foundational things that we've built, like our frameworks, like our modular content pieces, and make that work within omni-channel journeys that we're creating. So there's been a lot of change. We've tried to do so many things so quickly. So part of the challenge for us is like sometimes taking a step back, letting things stabilize and optimize, but at the same time, not sort of slowing down our appetite to experiment and try things out.
Mm. I mean, Hugh, we kind of touched on that when we spoke last week about how there's this expectation from the wider organization, especially senior managers, that everything digital happens.
Yeah,
So
I
how do
know.
you, in an age of AI, how do you tell people that it's a good idea to slow down and take a breath?
I don't know if I
That
have
sounds
the
really
answer.
hard for me.
Yeah, I do find it hard. I think we've so certainly thinking that, looking at how the AI tools can work within our ecosystem is an important piece. But, we're often distracted by kind of, lots of different opportunities with different vendors to sort of come in and provide something that just plugs in. I think the idea that AI can work with unstructured data is great, but I don't think that's an optimal place for AI to be plugged into. Like, here's all my content, just go and figure out what I should be creating or what I should be showing. Isn't it better if it has something that has a little bit more structure to it? So, I want to build on the foundations that we've established and not sort of make it irrelevant because we don't need any of that stuff anymore. AI can just do everything tomorrow. It isn't the reality. And I think we need to work in terms of how we maintain kind of humans in the loop in terms of what we're doing. But at the same time, make the most, I think, of the foundations that we built. And to be quite honest, also be very open to maybe we don't need some of the things that we've established in the past. That could be the result of this. It would be kind of upsetting in some cases if that was true. But, we have to be honest and reflect on that.
Sounds like you're having to channel your Musk style burning of some old bridges there. I hope it's doesn't feel like that in reality. Katharina, I would love your opinion on this. Taurus decided to exit the room completely. Doesn't obviously like this question, but Katharina, I would love to hear from you.
Yeah. So I don't know if I should be happy or sad because the realization is that we are probably all in our ecosystems pretty much in the same situation. So AI can potentiate a lot across the entire, pharma ecosystem, and in my experience, I still see quite a lot of piloting happening. So I don't want to fight with Hugh because he's a great fan of piloting, and I'm also. But the point is more to me. The biggest frustration is how we go from piloting into embedding what
Mm.
we learn from pilots into the organization. And so I see pilots across the organization, from R&D, of course, processes, big data, agglomeration and digestion and content generation. But really what I'm really passionate about is customer engagement, because this is where I grew in the organization. And there I also see some appetite to drive or to have AI driving some customer engagement. But I just want to bring it, and I'm surprised by the results here, and I love them because to me probably the biggest challenge is really aligning organizational culture with the need of AI. And I was just getting inspired by the end of last year, reading a bit, and I saw this report. I believe it was from Deloitte, and they were surprised with the finding that 80% of pharma leaders are happy with the current customer engagement model pharma has. So I think there is still some degree of resistance to scalability of pilots. So we do a pilot, we put someone managing the pilot, we look at the results, but then how really we overcome this human resistance to needing to embed, the new technology on our day-to-day life. I find this a big resistance. So just wanted to bring this human natural resistance to AI explosion in pharma.
Yeah, that was going to be my
Yeah.
question for Hugh, actually, was like, you're talking about customer journey. And, I guess there's, in my mind, there's sort of two flavors, right? There's the executional journey, I'll call it, of like, how do we actually program the technology to make that experience come to life? But there's also sort of the marketing, branding, strategic journey of what do I want that experience to be like for my customer. And I find that A, those two are not typically well connected, and B, our marketers are not ready or haven't had the ability to do marketing in that way before. So I'm curious if you have customer journeys that you're talking about. I think one of our hurdles has been we're kind of pushing rope. We're like, hey, you should build a journey that we can then use to execute an experience. But if you have a marketing way that gets the marketers excited about doing marketing in a new and different way, that's to me, that's one of the nuggets that needs to happen.
Yeah, and Jane, I think we are. I think our marketing teams are motivated to create journeys. They understand the benefit, and this is a direction that we should be moving in. We are not wholesale omnichannel. We are still a bit of a blend between multi-channel and omnichannel. Are we driving kind of really distinct personalization to teams? Maybe not quite yet, but we're moving in that trajectory. And I think to your point, to your question around, building a brief of an omnichannel experience and then executing it, they are two separate things, and we keep them very separated in many ways. So it's about, creating a kind of templates that our marketers can define journeys and hand off to our production teams to be responsible for execution. So taking that away from them. So, but that being said, I mean, to Katrina's point earlier as well on resistance, and I think resistance comes when you're asking people to do new things. And I think if we are thinking about, so a new thing is building journeys as opposed to doing multi-channel. That's a big new thing. Everyone's pretty overwhelmed with that. But then there are other aspects of that, within the remit of journeys, we then want to use content differently. We want to perhaps have marketers take get a little bit more hands-on in the way that they generate content, so they're not relying on agencies every single time to develop things. And that requires a lot of change and a lot of resistance. And that's kind of where I'm hoping that with doing these things, I'm not asking them to do more. I'm hoping that our future AI world actually takes a lot of that operational burden, and in the kind of experience that you start to develop, in your personal life, using things like ChatGPT should be the similar experience. Hey, create me an email that for my brand that says this kind of message, and that's kind of where we want this to get to. So really making sure that we can when I ask for something, it comes from a foundation of truth, and kind of that's kind of where we're trying to build to. And actually another question for the other panelists as well. Another area that we've sort of challenged, we're finding challenges from the ecosystem perspective, because we're trying to create journeys for customers. They don't care about whether it comes from medical or commercial sometimes. It's about unified experience of both things. But from an ecosystem perspective, they're still quite separate. Our teams are coming together, but we're still almost working in two separate environments. And that, I think, is quite a challenge in terms of how we really create really great experiences across both commercial and medical. Yeah, and I don't know if you have kind of similar challenges as well, like Jane or Katerina.
32% of people, wasn't it, that said they do have silos as their greatest challenge. I don't think anyone's without a silo challenge. I'd be really interested to hear from Jane and Katerina if you feel that you know how to solve that challenge.
I don't know if I can say definitively how to solve, but I think we've started having, first of just having conversations, because the organic structures, at least in our organization, is that the medical team rolls up into a global medical affairs function, which really doesn't have a common leader until you get to like our CEO. So for us to actually work together, it has to be basically just with a handshake. There's no mandate or structure that way. So the first thing we just did is set up a monthly recurring meeting with my sort of leadership team and the medical leadership team to just talk about, what are you guys doing? Where are there opportunities for overlap? You know, one of the examples that came up this last month was we have a coaching tool that's in our CRM, right, for first line leaders of field-based employees to provide coaching to their team members. That is absolutely transferable across medical and commercial, and that need for training and for development for people who are, you know, in a customer facing role is the same. So why don't we just share that platform and use it together? Like, those are kind of the things that pop up. So I think just by cracking open that conversation and finding places of mutual value, even if they're not specific to omnichannel, just like anything, right, that we're starting to talk to each other and work together, it kind of organically starts more conversations. And so if anything, now we have a person who's on the other side of that rope pulling back and saying, I want to know more about what you're doing, and I want to learn about how to do omnichannel. And if I think the one tricky part is now we have this tension between our bandwidth, if you will. So like, if there's one more hour in the day, should it be going to a commercial need or a sales and marketing kind of a request, or should it be going to a medical affairs request? And I think this is the natural tension that comes when you try to do a cross-functional silo break, you know, where you're saying, let's work together instead of in our silos. And so that's the next step now, is how do we get senior leaders comfortable with the idea of that shared resource, and that we would actually, you know, potentially trade off between those two functional areas to get work done. Hopefully we won't actually have the true trade-off, but I think just the idea that we would be diverting attention away from commercial toward medical is a new question, I think, for the senior leadership team to contend with. So I think the first step is just conversations and sharing, like, here's what we're doing and here's what you're doing, and let's learn. And so I mean, it's pretty basic, but that's kind of where a lot of our new ideas have come from, is just those conversations.
Katerina, do you want to jump in on that as well? Anything to add?
Yeah, I would just say, you know, I've been navigating between commercial and medical and in many different TAs, and it's really about the human connection and the human spark. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, even using the same recipe. So I think it's really based on the human power to establish this alignment. And I think also to be more evident on the accountability. I think in many organizations, we still see one of the areas leading the other. And I think we are getting into a place, and we will get it more and more, where the roles are not overlapped. They are completely complementary, and it's a peer relationship. And so this is where I've seen it working the best. So sharing, finding forums, like Jane was saying, to really align expectations, bring the issues and solve them there. And across the organization is also extremely important. And I've seen it work.
Okay. A couple of questions in the chat. Love the chat window conversation. Please keep that going. People asking Hugh about why qualitative data is not as good, and also about, you know, what structure needs to be in place. So Hugh, if you want to answer that, you can. I'm really interested in hearing Tor's perspective, who obviously gets to see across many different companies, and if there's any patterns that he sees on this challenge question. And I would love to ask the audience as well. So a new poll question is coming your way. which I will let you read and answer over the next 2 or 3 minutes. So Hugh.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think qualitative data is out of scope. I just think structured data is better. So it's not that we don't want to make the most of data that kind of exists in its current form, but I think if we can organize our data to be more aligned to the experiences we want to deliver, I think we're going to get better results. And
what does structured mean to you
well,
exactly?
structure to me to be very specific. You know, we've aligned our content to ladder up to customer experience, and I'll be more specific about what I mean by that. It means that I can look at a efficacy chart and I can see its supporting claim. I know which communication objective it aligns to. I know which customer I should present it to and at what point in time in the journey. That's what I mean. And when we have our content that's organized in a way that's more aligned to what we want to deliver, I expect to get better results. You know, that being said, I mean, well, I've seen things where we can scan libraries of content and it can kind of figure out, I think this is kind of what you want to say here, but it's to that statement I made, it's kind of figure out, does it really deliver that? And what's the role of the human in the loop then to sort of think about what a global messaging strategy should be? What should we be saying to a certain person at a point in time? And maybe AI can play a role in helping define that strategy. But I think we humans need to play a role in ensuring that it's organized in the way that we can deliver optimal experiences.
Mm. So Tor, I know you are proving your multitasking capabilities right now, but would love for you to also just come in on this. A word on challenges, barriers, frustrations
Sure.
that you are seeing, and whether there's also any movement in that over time, recent time.
So I've seen, and I definitely, Hugh, I agree with your position that there's a curation aspect, and there's a reason that in data science you would start with tagged data, you would start with qualified data. You have something that you want to work from. And when we're working, like as with our product Arcane, which can go through your vault and search on things and answer very strategic questions and do some lateral thinking, we know that there are 50,000, 60,000 documents we're looking across. But in truth, for your brand at a certain level, there's probably 10 documents that most of that value resides in. And your team has already invested a lot of their deep thinking and personal experience in curating those content modules that you want to work with and linking these things back. So we want to help with that ability to leverage with generative AI and authoring and all of these things that we're doing, all of the untapped potential. But to be really successful and to really scale, we have to focus on that pre-approved, structured, aligned data, aligned content that you've got. I was talking with someone literally an hour ago, and I had just come out of a call with the biopharma, and they said, well, this thing that you have with Arcane, it looks really great. You're going into this area where you're going to be able to create an email for multiple combinations of personas and segments. This is really exciting. We're brand new. We have 400 segments. And I was like, oh God, right? Have we talked about how you're going to approve all of this? Our challenge working in this space is the technology will absolutely allow us to make you 400 emails, but should you, right? And who's never going to talk to you again when you put 400 emails as your first touch point in your campaign into the MLR process? That's where I see the really big potential of modular content to give us an 80% pre-approved, curated set of material that we can optimize for different people we want to engage with. And then maybe 20% that we can use the generative side to plaster in the gaps for that particular mail that you want to share. Because we have to respect the bandwidth, even though we've been handed these power tools. There's so much enthusiasm and so many use cases. The work is in narrowing down so that we actually achieve something.
Tor, can I stick with you for a moment? Because I'd
Mhm.
like you to share a couple of slides which might take us a bit more towards the solutions now. We've talked about challenges. I'm
Mhm.
also going to end the poll while you do that and have a quick look at the results. Thank you to those of you who took part in my very many answered poll question there. So well done simply for reading them all. Let's have a look at the answers. So you'll see them on your screen at the moment. We do have a winner, which is the outdated content processes too slow for omnichannel engagement. So we can't be responsive, reactive. We can't have conversations with our HCPs. We can't be pivots. You can't pivot quickly and respond to the world in general, which is getting nearly a quarter of the vote there. Fairly even numbers on the rest, all sort of in the sort of 5% to 15% range, really. Tech integration is probably number two, isn't it? Internal mindset, not surprised to see that one, and regulatory. Interesting that regulatory actually gets 15% because I've found that that number has been dwindling over time, that people are blaming regulatory as the reason why they can't do things. Increasingly, it's our interpretation and our getting our knickers in a twist over regulations that's more the issue than the actual regulations themselves. Anyway, I've just realized that you may not be able to see what I've been talking about, so I'm sharing the result now. Apologies for that. These Zoom buttons are getting more fiddly. There you go. That's taking us backwards. Right, you should be able to see the results now. Tor, over to you.
All right. Well, I promise to do my best to not take up too much time. So wave vigorously.
We love hearing from you, Tor. What do you think?
Yes, we say that. Let me just get. All right. This is a chunk from a talk I gave recently. And I'll spare you the bit where we begin in the 1780s and connect fashion to data warehousing today. It's a very, very fun intro across recent and non-recent history. But the important part is that transformation repeats certain patterns and disrupts things in certain ways. And the rhyme that we're going through today in history is this disruption that you can trace back to, to the Luddites, to the introducing industrial processes and weaving in the UK. But it's about moving from a more artisanal, crafted approach to content production, guided by very few hands and people with years of experience, into something that is accelerated, where bars have dropped, where more people have more opportunities to deliver against it. And with that comes certain, changes. When we're looking at AI, we're looking at areas of where does it make sense to apply it? And there's a few criteria here that I realize that just sort of have come to mind. But when you're working with something, you're limited by local resources or external vendors. Your outcomes are kind of feelings-based and not data-based. But you are facing pressure to perform and expand the scope of your activities. You might be struggling to scale with your current ways of working. You're dependent on people that take a long time to onboard into an area, and you may or may not be bottlenecked by individual expertise. If you've ever sat down and asked reviewers, but how do you make the decision? What is the flow chart when you're making that choice? You realize that there's a lot of this that is just human skill and human knowledge that we depend on. So there are areas beyond content development that we've seen great cases for using AI. From strategy, we did a 2-day workshop the other week, and again, using our tool, which is fine, but having regional leads say, I'm going to be using this for our next campaign. I'm learning things about our own brand. We want to drive that knowledge sharing. And like you were saying, Jane, training or onboarding is a wonderful case. Handling meta inquiries and contributing to MLR and approval processes. Personally, I love the campaign ideation and planning and different ways we can support a field force. But to be fair, we're here all excited about AI. We're hands-on with it. We're at the edge of this, but we're dealing with organizations who have evolved over decades to their current shape. And I think, Paul, that kind of goes to the, how do you ensure that even if someone gives you a gold star for a good pilot, you're able to move to that next level and say, this is our new way of working, get that actual buy-in for actual transformation. But things change, right? And previously, on previous seasons of Ways of Working, working in brands, this was your experience. You want to make an email, and these 15 people show up from your AOR with various roles that they're going to bring to the table to craft you that perfect email that you're able to send off. And that, well, leaves you, the person with the value, with the vision, who's responsible for the result, with 15 intermediaries that you have to guide that content past, who do not and never will entirely share your values and ambition. Because life science, it's about cost optimization, rapid productions, on-demand services. We want to share knowledge. We want to improve ourselves, which external vendors, no matter what they're saying, do have their own agenda. They want to have a certain ownership of their IP. There's an overlap, but it's a Venn diagram. It's not a circle. So there are, goals within pharma, and then goals that an AOR or an external vendor will always have. There's a requirement for profit. They're relying on individual people who are those SMEs that know exactly how to talk about your brand. That was one of the things that came out of our AI workshop, that, my God, if I needed to get a new copywriter, a new medical writer, there's no way they would know all of these things about this molecule without spending a lot of quality time here. But with Gen AI and things like Arcane that we're playing with, you can start talking to someone that has all of these capabilities. So struggling with that agency model, and even if we're talking about the transition period where you have your internal factory, an internal factory is fantastic and it is an evolutionary step, but it is internalizing that production process. And very often the savings that you might have had against an agency do turn into savings for the business, but that doesn't mean that those savings went to your brand budget. They're just realized by procurement as cost avoidance, and you have a different process that you're going through. So what is the next step beyond that? What would it look like? So for us, there are some values we care about. There's transparency, velocity, low cost, high scalability. We need to decentralize the ability to create tactics, but centralize the knowledge that we work from, to centralize the truth that we work from. And like Hugh was saying, these teams have curated and built structured data, specific messages, specific journeys we want to see reused. How do we make AI the recommender, the partner that will make sure that these things actually happen? So our view of what that AI-enabled content stack looks like is something like this. It's not that wall of 15 people between you and the goal, but it is a system that is combining the knowledge of your compliance standards, access to your design systems, the personas you want to talk to, the content modules, the ability to translate into all of your market languages. It's connected to your internal, but also external data sources. We want you to be able to look at your own internal references, but through a controlled manner, access resources like PubMed for research, but at the same time, have on-demand access to your brand strategy documents and the best practices of how you officially communicate. What are your communication strategies? All of that needs to be available to you. You're the person with the idea. You're the person with the mission to say something for this brand. And we can replace those 16 people with some SMEs, the rest of your org, contributing to this stack and giving you direct access to it. And that, we hope, drives that internal cycle that we all work with, from strategy through shaping it to building those variations, building it rapidly, localizing it, getting it out, getting it to the field and learning from it, just in a lighter weight way, with less centralized barriers and processes that each individual person has to go through, but hopefully baking in the guardrails, baking in all of that knowledge that the rest of the organization has invested in, to make sure what you come up with your generative AI, what that recipe that you cook with, is something that we actually believe in and can approve and get out and do it faster than we could 1, 2, 3 years ago. Now, I've got a lot of other things that I could talk about, but being mindful of time and being interested in the reaction of the panelists to this, I think, Paul, I'll take a break from the slideware here and see what the rest of
Quite
our
all
colleagues.
right, quite all right, Tor, and thank you for sharing. A question from me, if that's okay.
Mhm.
I think that there's been a certain level of comfort in the wall from
Mhm.
people traditionally. They've enjoyed being bathed in the arms of those anonymous job titles, and of course, the agency of records have always claimed to be the experts. Don't worry, we will mold your immature idea into something that is expert. And I think people might even be a bit scared that there's less of that sort of
Mm.
babying. They might not admit it, of course, but
Right.
does the solution that you've proposed still enable that sense of comfort and, of course, quality
Mhm.
that people ultimately will look for and people will supposedly still pay a premium for, although that's disappearing, but today still are.
Right. Well, I think on that trajectory from our Mad Men era of David Ogilvy and the grand AOR, you can go to Google today and Google WPP shares.
Mm.
There's a big red arrow right now. And I think this is, we have been historically, and we work with, and we know plenty of partners in agencies. It is hard for agencies right now because this shift is happening. Organizations are in-housing expertise. They are investing, like Jane and Otka are doing, in platforms that will enable these capabilities. So it is scary, but it's only scary, I think, if your position is, I feel comfort if I can blame someone or have a justification for why we only have 2.3 touch points with our customers in this campaign. It takes 7 to change a mind and move someone fully over. We should be enabling that. And if somebody feels like part of the system is slowing them down or is a barrier, I mean, let's fix it. That's at least what I and my team are here for. I think
Yeah.
these things are possible, but it's the people and the change management that always is the slowest moving part and takes the most work.
Yeah, it's still worth trying. I'd love to hear the rest of the panel. I think Hugh, you're about to come in there, but I'm also going to, you guys have been so good at the polls, so I'm going to do another one. It's another three-parter. It's on AI-driven solutions, so obviously relates to what Tor has just been talking about. Hugh, sorry, I think I interrupted you there.
Oh no, that's like I was just going to comment on one thing I liked in terms of the vision that Tor presented is, we're thinking about Gen AI. I mean, the topic today is content re-engineered, but to me, it's not just creating singular content pieces. That isn't really on the channel anyway. What we actually want to do is create experiences and all of these things at once, and that really remains the North Star, not just like create me an email that works for this customer, but create me an experience that achieves this objective. And through that process, developing the relevant content pieces that align to that. And I think that's where I'm really excited about the potential. And perhaps that's kind of where we were talking about friction earlier and change and all the things you need to do to drive omnichannel. Wouldn't that be a great thing? If all of our journeys and our templates and our assets and our personas and the information we have around our customers is in a library that can then be learned from an AI engine and deliver the experiences in a more automated, fast way. I mean, it felt like an unachievable North Star about 3 years ago, but it feels quite real now. And that's where I'm really excited. I think that's where my passion is, about getting to that place, because that way we can reduce some of the barriers to change and adoption and just make this feel like a very seamless process.
And you're working with Anthill to achieve that now, right, Hugh?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Jane, Katerina, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really resonated with me is the notion of the agency of record being this kind of warm, fuzzy blanket sort of vibe from a lot of the marketers. And so how do you kind of get that bridge from using agency of record for anything and everything to do all of the creative work to maybe some sort of a hybrid approach, and then eventually kind of maybe scale back how much of it is done by an AOR and how much of it is done in a kind of a, derivatives is kind of the terminology I use. Like you've come up with the campaign, you've come up with the key look and feel, and all the things that make it the way you want it to be for your customer's experience. And then you can start to do more things yourself, right? Like you don't have to have the agency do every single step of the process anymore. It's a little more complicated, obviously, to do, but I think that's part of what we have to start to kind of use the agency of record as a tool, but not as a sort of, you know, everything tool. So part of what is probably going to happen over time is that the agencies of record themselves are going to have to adapt. In fact, many of them are using AI a ton to kind of reduce their spend and personnel costs and things. So my hunch is it'll kind of meet in the middle, because the agencies will start to say, we probably aren't the cost-effective solution for you to do all of this stuff anymore. We're going to, you know, offer more of that creative service that's really human derived, and then, you know, help you kind of essentially automate the rest, because it's not as valuable as the original initial content creation process.
I maybe just have more of a question regarding, so how do we see these models evolving, and how do we see adoption of, you know, the new ways of working also for the pharma organization as it is? So I'm trying to see futuristically. So I know we are talking about experimentation, but how will we see, you know, how will we be in 10 years? So this is more of a question for Tor. What is your vision?
Your crystal ball is required, Tor.
Yes, my crystal ball. There we go. The thing that I've been saying a lot is that these technologies are here, and if we apply them correctly, what they liberate us from is drudgery, chores, homework, processes. I am in meetings with people like yourselves and people like those that are attending this webinar, who are incredibly skilled and intelligent and have so much insight, who are spending their time ticking boxes in forms and explaining themselves for the 5th time to achieve something that is honestly really mundane. So if we can use technology for once to liberate ourselves from the mundane and use our brains in a strategic capacity to actually think about where we want to go, where we want to drive our message, think about how much more we could do, right? This is my hope, that we can, each person can elevate the level that they're contributing at. So somebody who might have been very tactical can start, you know, contributing in a more strategic way, or across a bigger part of a campaign, or thinking in a broader context.
So look, whilst I obviously would love to talk about the future, the liberated future, as Tor has just described, content re-engineering is the focus still. And I studied engineering at university, hated it, got a terrible degree, if I'm honest. And one thing I do recall was that so much of it was about reducing failure demand, the propensity to fail. And I would love to hear from the panel, just as we move on to the sort of practical part of this discussion of how we actually make this work. What is your greatest, when you think about the engineering and the ecosystem around content, what is your greatest failure point that you see happening and would really encourage the audience listening in to invest in to avoid happening going forward? So thinking like engineers, yes, we want the beautiful future, Tor's crystal ball, but we also need to reduce failure demand. Otherwise, we're never going to get there. We're never going to trust it. What is your engineering top tip to avoid failure, please?
If I could go back in time and do things differently, I would have taken, I think, a little bit more of a stepwise approach in terms of some of the things that we did. We tried to do a lot very quickly, and not everything was kind of quite what we expected it to be. I would have loved to have taken more of a stepwise approach to things like, for example, there's been a lot of chat around claims. I think they are, the Viva Claims Library is a great opportunity to really build automation, and it's a key ingredient and foundation to some of the other things that we want to do. I wish I'd sort of embedded those behavior changes earlier as kind of distinct capabilities before we started thinking about modular content, So that's kind of one thing from an engineering perspective, Paul, I wish I did slightly differently. Also, the experience around things like authoring tools and capabilities where I can drag and drop things, which that was the behavior change I embedded individually. Now I feel I'm in a position where I've got to do almost everything at once, and it's quite overwhelming, like for our marketers and for me. So it creates that was something I would look back and change in terms of the approach.
Thank you. Tor's throwing some ideas into the chat, but Katerina and Jane want to hear from you on your engineering credentials here.
I'm from life sciences, no engineering background, but I would bring for sure the end user or whoever will benefit from these early on into the building and design process. So I think, again, going back to this resistance that we have when we implement anything is bringing them earlier on. For example, in customer engagement, bring the HCP on the journey. So as an example, I would for sure change that.
Cool. And just bear in mind, Jane's going to answer, but I'm going to close the poll in as soon as she has answered. So get your answers in. Only 40% of you have voted. Come on now, team. Let's make sure our last 10 minutes here are solid performance. So poll results in, please. Jane.
So as an actual engineer as well, and way more physics homework than I expected, right? Like it was not,
yeah, there was never any creativity. It was just math.
Yeah, I wanted to build things, and we were just writing numbers on paper. No, but I think the system process piece of it is there, and that's probably what we try, but I think it's always really hard to get people to document and to put process out of their brain and onto some sort of other medium that we can all understand. And I think the more we have those conversations and kind of understand what the real rub is or the real problem is that we're trying to solve and really get specific about that, I think that's one of the ways that we've seen some success in terms of just getting people to realize this step is where I get stuck, or this is the step where I need the most help and it takes the most time, or whatever that looks like, to kind of really think through the system of it rather than just strictly like the emotion of it. Because a lot of times the first thing you get is more the emotional reaction to change and fear of change. I think that's probably the thing I'm most worried about, is that we kind of retrograde on some of these things, because I do see some tendency sometimes from our sales and marketing backgrounded leaders in pharma. Most people at the sort of C-suite level in pharma have mostly done sales rep and marketing jobs, and they don't have as much comfort or familiarity with data, technology, operations, omni-channel. All of that stuff is sort of a new world. And so the fear I have is that folks will, under pressure, go back to what they know the best, as opposed to being willing to see that under pressure is the time to start doing this new approach, so you don't get kind of lapped by your competitor. So I think there's a kind of a combination of the engineering of the process itself, but also the humanistic kind of pushing people to be willing to take that risk and be willing to see that there's a better kind of other side of this initial hump of work to get there that is often hard for people to see in the moment. So those are probably the two things I worry about and try to work on the most from my perspective.
Yeah, I'm going to end the poll, but Jane, do you think that we're all stick and not enough carrot? Because you say, work on that humanistic side, and I sometimes feel like people are browbeaten into saying, come on, keep up, as opposed to look at where we can be.
Yeah, I do. I think we need to do more with the art of the possible and the carrot of it all. And I try to talk about that a lot with my conversations with our senior leaders, is like imagining a world where these things are working well and trying to get to that, what Tor's talking about.
Can't imagine it.
And I think that's hard. People really struggle with that because they're in the weeds of it right now. And we are kind of in the sort of the disillusionment part of the hype cycle, if you will, with a lot of this. And so you do get those moments where there's, I'm hearing this isn't working and it's a bad idea, and kind of this like, retrograding kind of tendency that has to be managed both from I think to your point, like some kind of carrot, like what's in it for us if we do this, if we make these changes, how much better will it actually be? And you can focus on some of the tedium and drudgery, Tor. I think that's a good place for people to say, I hate this part of my job, and what if it went away? But maybe more importantly is that theoretically all of this is about our customer and their need and their confusion and their navigation of pharma, which is really, to me, one of the biggest challenges that honestly the whole industry is struggling with right now, is that we don't really have a very good customer experience when it comes to working with us. So how do we think about that as our end game and kind of put that as the carrot? Like we could have patients have better outcomes, we could have physicians be more engaged and feeling like they're getting the information that they need to make good decisions, all of that. I mean, that's really the the real kind of focus that should be our North Star, if you will.
Yeah. I love that, Jane. I love the idea of like keeping everyone motivated on what the end vision is, because you do get lost in the drudgery of the operations when you're doing new things. So I really like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to actually just, yeah, we've only got like, how long have we got? 5 minutes left, 4 minutes left. I'd love to just hear your final thoughts on how we, because, going back to that issue at the beginning, we talked about getting senior level buy-in and getting them to recognize that it's not going to happen overnight. What are the final top tips for that humanistic carrot providing side and consistency of message that is going to see us through? I would love to just hear your final comments on that. I've obviously shown you the poll results. I'm not reading them out this time because I think you've all figured out how to read yourselves, but some interesting results there. Some unsurprisingly, 59% of you saying a hybrid approach, but actually more than I expected. 21% saying yes, automate as much as possible, and 12% saying no on that final question, which I thought was a surprise. But yes, that's good. And I've got one final poll question for you as well. So, Katerina and Tor, I would love to hear your thoughts on how we provide that carrot. What is the visionary, the inspirational element that we can provide here?
Katerina, I'll let you go first on this.
You mean from an organizational perspective, to have the buy-in and, to have...
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
But from a human and organizational perspective.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think sponsors always work well. So the way we work is we always have sponsors. And then I think we don't celebrate enough when pilots go well. Someone just mentioned we get lost in, the flavor of the day. We have, so much going on. But like really take a moment, celebrate the success of the pilot, and then having the commitment to embed it in the organization. So this is where I'm finding the resistance. It's nice to have a pilot, but find a really strong, top tier sponsor to support then the rest of the organization engaging on it. And we talked about this very briefly, I think in Pharmageddon. It's also how we can create empathy of people towards the organization and towards the system. How we build this empathy, knowing that we need change. And so how we build more this empathy towards the system.
I love that.
Well, that was excellent delegation, but it's come back to you. Sorry.
No, that's fine. I absolutely agree. Senior leadership, senior sponsorship, to actually make people care, to make people actually drive towards that North Star. Everyone has a million demands on their time. We need to prioritize. The other thing I think that is very important is people are coming to this with excitement, with enthusiasm. We have a project at a partner. They're banging down the door to scale it because everyone thinks this is really shiny. What you can do is actually bring the level down a little bit and say, we're not just going off of this on hype. This is the 5 things that we're going to do, and this is how we're going to measure them. We're not just here to throw a party or to have a carnival. Here's how we're going to help you demonstrate value and prove that you should invest in this next year in your next budget. Having the responsibility to not just get on the hype cycle roller coaster and enjoy it, but actually try and work for the longer term.
Amazing. What encouraging words to finish the conversation with, guys? I think we are just about almost at the hour. Please do answer this next step question. It's actually very, very important. Also, there's a link in the chat for more webinars if we've been unable to satiate you today. But the key message I want to do is obviously say a massive thank you. Huge thanks, of course, to Katerina, Jane, Hugh, Tor for their energy, expertise, insight today. They've all been very generous in contributing. Nobody has forced them into this room. Well, maybe a little bit. They have been incredibly kind to be so revealing about what it is they're doing. So please, let's have a round of applause for them. Obviously, massively appreciate all of you who were watching, particularly those who were active in the chat window. Before you go, do feel free to throw in an idea of what you'd like to see in a future session, any unanswered questions that you feel that we need to get to. I'm going to hold this window open for a couple of minutes after I end the webinar, so you've got time to type no excuses. You don't want to go to that next meeting anyway. Let's be honest. Let's be honest. So thank you ever so much, everyone who was listening in. Those of you who are going to be at Pharmageddon in the US in April, I will see you there. Those of you who will be in October in Amsterdam, I will see you there too. It's going to be great fun. And until next time, I want to say a special little thank you to the Anthill team, because they have been behind the scenes partnering with us and making sure that today's webinar went so smoothly. And of course, to Tor for his insights that he shared earlier. So special thumbs up there, but really to all of our panelists and all of you, good luck. I hope it all goes well. And I look forward to hearing the success stories as you re-engineer your future going forward. Thanks so much, everyone. Catch you next time. Bye then.